For Courtney Graham, she is the manager of customer success at ActiveCampaign, customer experience automation company based in Chicago. She currently manages an international team of account managers. Courtney has worked with companies of all size, from Fortune 500 brands to SBMB, helping them cultivate email marketing and customer engagement strategies. Courtney hails from Texas, where she worked on political campaigns and community outreach. She moved to Chicago. She's grown as a SaaS professional in the enablement and marketing automation space. Outside of work, she has a passion for traveling, reading, hiking, and finding the best guacamole in town. Yes, let's give it up for Courtney.
Okay, sit here.
I'm a little offended you didn't give a shout out for me, Margarita. Just kidding. No, I am going to speak very loudly, though, because the air conditioning is a little bit loud, and I want to make sure that people can laugh at all my jokes tonight. My name's Eva Jackson. Can you raise your hand if this is your first time attending an Agile marketing event? Wow, that's a decent amount of people. So welcome to first timers. My name's Eva. Like I said, I'm one of the co-founders of Agile Marketing Indy. We started about 2 years ago as just like a casual coffee and donuts meetup in the mornings. I think our first event was like 10 people in a conference room, and we've evolved to around 600 people total in our entire community, and we're really thankful for anybody new, anybody who returns, anybody who brings new people. So thank you, and appreciate you guys checking us out tonight. And I'm super excited because Courtney is actually our first out-of-towner speaker.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Oh, I don't know why I'm speaking in the microphone.
Yeah, because we're recording this for our wonderful Share Your Genius podcast later. So it's always so weird because I feel like we talk super loudly, and it's probably like annoying for Mike because you're like, we just scream into our microphones even though it's a podcast. So So anyways, Courtney is our first out-of-towner from Chicago. Actually, one of our goals for this year was to bring in a speaker from out of town. As we kind of grow our community, we want to make sure that we are really spotlighting the best and the brightest, not only from Indianapolis, but from beyond. And the podcast has actually been a really great kind of medium for that. But, you know, Chicago's right down the road. And so we're really excited to be able to spotlight ActiveCampaign and the ways that you use automation to get shit done for marketers that you talk to every day. So before we get started, I just want to give one other quick shout out to Design on Tap again, because the beer was really warm and they went downstairs and bought more beer. So shout out to you guys. I think it's finally getting cold, so I won't be offended if anybody gets up and grabs a beer. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. So Margarita gave a wonderful intro about you, and I know you've been at ActiveCampaign for quite a while. Yes. And we actually talked as we were kind of getting ready for this. Your role has evolved quite a bit, and you're actually going to be kind of not kind of. You're going to be like making a huge shift soon. So
Yes, that
can
is
I talk
correct.
about it?
Yes, go ahead.
As I'm like in front of here with everybody. So yeah, just share a little bit more about your role at ActiveCampaign, kind of what it looks like in your day to day, and what's next for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if anybody's familiar with ActiveCampaign. Can you guys? Great. Yeah, can you guys hear me? Perfect. So we are a customer experience marketing automation platform. Marketing automation goes just beyond email marketing. We have CRM, we have messaging, we obviously have a marketing function, and then it's all kind of wrapped into automation and customer experience. I came on a little early in ActiveCampaign's history. We've seen tremendous growth over the last 2-3 years. And you can, as you heard from my bio, I have a very varied background. In each role, it was sort of, dealing with customers and community and outreach and engagement. And so I made the shift into customer success in sort of a kind of a whirlwind way to say, like, can I find a company and a culture that I really agree with and I really find value in, and the idea of empowering small medium businesses to have more meaningful connections with their own customers was a message I could really get behind. And automation is the new buzzword, right? It's the new thing that we're all talking about, and there's a lot of value in it. So I came in employee like number 80. So I've seen a lot of growth. I started on the customer success team. Our role is specifically to provide strategic help to our customers. So it goes beyond just general support. It goes beyond advocacy in a way that we're connected to all of that. We're connected to the customer journey and experience, the sales process, and then support. But really, we're there to make sure that they're finding value in the platform alongside their own business goals, which isn't always that easy to do. Because as you know, if you're a small, medium business, sometimes those goals aren't so clearly defined, even for yourself. And then I just sort of moved my way through. So we've done a couple of restructurings in our department to make sure that we're better able to serve our customers and we're better able to provide a customer journey. So now I manage some account managers. I helped launch our team in Sydney to get them up and running. So that was our first venture into APAC. And in August, I'll be moving to Dublin to launch our customer success department there. So super fun. Yeah.
Just casually moving to Ireland.
It's fine. Yeah. It's just a thing. It's actually a little bit like the Midwest, but Irish. So it's just, it's not all that different. Fine.
Well, thanks for that background.
Sure.
I was really excited when Courtney came on as a speaker because I think we'll get a couple of different tactics and takeaways from tonight. One, just kind of general best practices on how to automate the customer journey and kind of what we need as marketers to make that as efficient as possible, but also kind of a peek behind the curtain about how ActiveCampaign uses agility in its own customer experience and kind of creating that journey for their own prospects and customers. So do you mind sharing, Courtney, a little bit about, as marketers, everyone in this room, we talk a lot about automation. As you said, it's the big buzzword right now. We talk about it a lot, though, from the prospecting side. So how do we automate them to get them to the close, to basically get them to sign the dotted line? What does that look like after the close? How do you think about automation going down the entire customer funnel?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so automation, you have to think in terms of how do I automate yet still have a good balance of human touch. So the last thing you want to do is automate everything, right? And that's something that we're very, it's part of our core values, that we're not here to replace humans. We're here to enhance that experience overall. So it means the simplest thing to do is just to start with a plan and sort of figure out what needs to be automated in terms of like your daily task or something that you're doing repeatedly over time. Are there email functions that don't require such a personal touch, but you could have some sort of spin on it, and that's something you could easily automate and then have a personal follow-up after that. So for prospecting for customers coming in or leads coming in, we automate everything up until the point that they get to a demo. So whether they're signing up for a free trial or we collect that lead in another manner, we're automating every touch point up until someone someone actually reaches out and they agree to book a call with us. And after that, it becomes a very personal experience, and we walk them through the rest of the sales cycle. After that, when they actually convert and they become customers, there is a very general customer follow-up that we automate, just because we can send resources and we can get education in front of them quickly. We can also drive them to our onboarding, which sort of starts their customer journey with us. But then after that, depending on where they are in their own life cycle, we look for different data points to determine when to reach out personally or when to drop them in different pieces of our funnel.
Yeah. Going to go off the record on the questions a little
Sure.
bit. You mentioned having a plan on how to kind of pull out some areas that it would be easy to automate.
Yeah.
A lot of people in our group are kind of one-man teams or very small
Sure.
teams. How do you document and prioritize the areas that need automated? What are some best practices you give to your customers to kind of pull out those areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's two things you can, or there's a couple things you can do to start. One is sort of just looking at your current customer journey, and just looking at the current state of it, and then taking a little bit of time, as manual or as cumbersome as it may be, to then kind of create or draft what your ideal customer journey looks like. You'll either start to see things that overlay, or you'll start to see places where you can shift and you can create something new. And then within your own customer journey or within your day-to-day process, what are you doing that's repeated? And keep in mind too, automation doesn't have to be about email, right? It doesn't have to just always be about email marketing. Are there tasks that you're doing repeatedly? And are there emails that you're sending where it's a very generic message, but maybe it directs them to the next step in the process, or it prompts them to book a call or start a free trial or something like that. So just sort of looking at those places where it's repetitive or where you're spending a ton of time, and then start to look at the way that you can automate that. Now the trick is having either a tool or having the ability to sort of code that automation into your day-to-day.
Sure. How do you advise customers when they run into areas where you can automate as much as possible, but it still needs a human element at that point? How do you advise your customers to gain better efficiency in those areas while still, finding those areas that you can use a tool or more efficient data or something to, get that process done?
Yeah, so I think, in all of the data that you're collecting, and when you're sort of making those decisions of where do you automate, where do you not automate, when is it a personal outreach? I think it is a little bit, it kind of depends. It does relate a little bit to your business and what those goals might be. And then also thinking too of how your customer journey breaks down. In ours, for example, we have different segments, and each segment has a different goal or a different conversion. And with each of those goals, we're looking for different types of behaviors, data points, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
But we can automate up until the point to where we know that some of those behaviors actually lead to either the next step in the customer journey, or in most cases where it actually gets that customer to convert on that particular goal. And an example of that is most customers probably have, or most businesses probably have, a stage where you go from lead to customer, and then within that customer bucket, you probably have a goal, or maybe some KPIs around either expanding, so upselling, or renewing, right? And a good way to kind of think of what can I automate? Well, if you're tracking website behavior or actions that they're taking in your product or your platform, you can look for those key indicators to say, okay, they visited this page so many times, therefore I think they're more likely to upsell. Then I can automate that process. So I can send a task or an internal email, and then I can have a rep or a salesperson follow up and have that be the personal touch. So you've automated a piece of it, but you're still keeping that human connection.
Sure.
And then it's also too, I think it's a little less creepy, because I think that's the problem with automation, is we tend to think that it's all bots and it's all, it's all mechanical and machine learning, and how much do they know about me? And if you can take some of that out, and you can have someone call or send an email that is actually very personal with a little bit of discovery and the right messaging, provided it's in the right life cycle or in the right stage in that life cycle, you can actually create a much more meaningful interaction.
Awesome. A lot of these tactics depend on quality data.
They do. They do.
Raise your hand if you have the perfect data on your marketing team. Nobody? All right.
We
Same.
struggle too. Everybody struggles with this. So don't worry.
So obviously, you can pinpoint areas to create better automation. You can
Sure.
pinpoint areas in the customer journey that can be more efficient with the right tools.
Yeah.
What are, the people in this room, we probably can only affect so much of the customer funnel,
Right.
being marketers and salespeople. What are 3 things that marketers could do to create a better data infrastructure at the top of the funnel so that when they get to the bottom of the funnel, it is setting you up for a better customer journey throughout the entire life cycle? And I say 3 because that's on my paper, but if you have less or more, that's fine.
Yeah. So that's a good question. And so I think, are you thinking more of like actual KPIs or things that you're collecting from your customers, or more internally?
Let's do internally.
Okay. I would say, so going off of just kind of how ActiveCampaign operates, so what we tried to do, and this is kind of recently, because we were actually in a position where, we had all of this data, and we had all of these messaging and all these tools. We obviously use our own tool, but we were actually communicating with our customers in a way that wasn't adhering to the actual values we were telling our customers, which is send the right message at the right time, at the right stage in the life cycle. But and a lot of that had to just do with first scrubbing the data just as much as we could, and just trying to figure out what pieces we were actually acting on, and then how much of it that we had that we weren't actually using, and just sort of doing an audit, and creating an audit process that way that actually involved other stakeholders in the company. So in that regard, our marketing team had to partner a lot with success.
Mm-hmm.
We had to look at what the journey looked like once it left prospecting or
Totally.
getting those leads in, to see how they were actually interacting with us down that funnel.
Yeah.
I think the other thing too is creating a lot of transparency. So, and I think that starts with marketing, and just how that journey starts, and then how it impacts teams down the line.
Yeah.
And then what we actually tried to do for our whole entire funnel, and we started with sales, and we're slowly moving through the org, is we're actually just mapping out in just one giant lucid chart what that looks like. And that actually gives buy-in from all the teams, but it also gives buy-in from leadership too, so that we know where to invest resources, and then we also know where to spend more time in messaging. And then I think also too, the last thing that I would say, it's just, I don't know if this is internal, but I would just say testing. Just making sure that you're, especially if you are automating, testing becomes even more important, and then making sure that it's not a set it and forget it mindset.
Yeah.
I think that's where we lost a lot of the value in our data, is since we are an automation company.
Yeah.
This idea that you can just build it and it just runs forever, and it collects all of the things that you need, and you spend time elsewhere. And while that's true, that's not a best practice, right? And so marketing sort of had to leave that charge, because they're creating not only the messaging for our entire life cycle, but they're bringing those customers in from the beginning.
Yeah.
So how we're collecting that data became really important for us to make sure we were going back and making sure we were collecting the right things.
Right.
Does
Kind of
that
goes
answer
back.
your question?
It did, yeah.
Okay.
And I think it goes back to the idea of automation can only create so much efficiency, and if it's overly automated, it creates more work.
Yeah, exactly. And this is an interesting one, and some tools do this, not every tool does. We sort of have a hack that we do, and there are equations out there. I was looking last night to see if there was one I could distill down, but task efficiency too, I think, is really important.
Right.
So time to completion, that's something we do on success and on our sales team. So if we're spending all this time automating, at least creating the process to automate,
right?
And then we're empowering our reps or our teams to have more meaningful conversations from that automation. Are they actually being efficient with the task and with the data that we're giving them? So we had to figure out a way to internally track that as well.
Awesome. We've talked a lot about data agility and kind of using it to, automate those key points in the journey. Let's kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about agility in your customer experience, active campaigns. How do you use the data that you gather or feedback that you gather from customers to kind kind of continually improve the customer experience at ActiveCampaign?
Yeah. So again, I think the first thing, it goes back to one, having auditing processes. We even have, we're just like any company that's scaling, we have to find that balance of when to iterate, when not to iterate, when to be reactive, when to be proactive. So auditing becomes something that's really key for us. I think visibility, again, becomes something that's even more important, seeing how each team plays a role in the success of our customers. One thing that was really, really small that we did, but actually had a big impact that we actually didn't kind of intend for it to, customer success being sort of kind of a hub. We interact with a lot of teams on a daily basis, and we have a large part to say in what our advocacy and what our whole experience looks like. But even just having that customer journey for, even if we're just telling the story of one customer in particular, to all of our new hires coming in. So we're kind of indoctrinating the teams early on that we all play a part in this, and we all impact it through our day-to-day. Yeah, I would say that. And then, yeah.
Cool. You've talked a lot about alignment between departments, not only for externally a better customer experience, but internally creating more efficiency and process throughout the org. I think everyone here would agree that alignment is really key, but I think alignment, when there's more levels of communication, there's also more requests that come in or more suggestions that you're not sure what to do with.
Sure.
So as you're kind of creating that alignment and focusing first on the customer, are there specific tactics or strategic planning initiatives or anything that ActiveCampaign does to ensure that, the projects that come in or the requests that your team gets, or even from external customers, like the backlog that you get from requests on features or whatever, how do you ensure that the best things are kind of sifting to the top?
Yeah, we definitely leverage as many tools as we can. We actually may have a little bit of tool overload at times, but anything that's critical to business, so whether it's marketing or product, or just sort of kind of mapping out that journey, obviously goes in a tool like Jira. So there's a lot of visibility, and we can actually plan that, and we can make decisions based on how we're moving through those sprints. I would say the other piece of it is, I think strategic planning, kind of along with auditing, it's become something that you just have to get in the habit of doing, whether that looks like, monthly stakeholder meetings or quarterly stakeholder meetings. Sure. Making sure that if you have C-suite meeting, that information's going down to directors and then frontline managers and then individual contributors. We do, right now, we're kind of going through like the whole V2 mom, so we're kind of taking from Salesforce a little bit, where we're actually like planning out what our company initiatives are. And I think that really helps too, because then when you're talking about being agile and you need to make a change quickly, if you can communicate that back to an overall goal, it becomes better. It becomes easier to get buy-in, not only from leadership, but I think also individual contributors as well.
Totally.
Because at the end of the day, they're doing the work.
Right.
And that's what we find a lot too, is just having our team buy into that idea that we're constantly changing and iterating on process.
Cool. Speaking of iteration, last question before we kind of open it up for group Q&A. You had mentioned at the beginning you were hire, was it 80? Or
yes.
Okay. And how many are you up to now?
Between all of our offices and some contractors, we are 440.
Okay.
Or so a little over 400. Yeah.
So I have to do math really quickly.
Yeah, no, it's a lot.
I'm trying to think of like how many X that is, but it's grown a lot since you started.
Yes.
So as you've kind of talked about this process for planning or establishing KPIs or, creating monthly alignment meetings, how has that evolved over the growth that you've seen at ActiveCampaign?
Yeah, I think if anything, it may have, I don't want to say it's become harder, but it is sometimes harder to get everyone all into agreement. So, planning might take longer than you would typically like, especially when you're trying to make an impact or a change quickly. And especially if something's not working and you want to pivot and you want to iterate in that way. I think the way we've seen it evolve is really just, I know this sounds like like I'm like a broken record, but truly transparency is key, and then making sure that we have good communication channels. And I think that depending on your business, that looks a little bit different.
Sure.
But even if it's another Slack channel, just making sure that you're constantly like looping in all the appropriate people so that you
Right.
can make decisions faster.
Sure.
I think like that's probably the biggest hurdle we have sometimes. It's hard to get directives through the entire org. But as you evolve and as you grow, that becomes more important.
Yeah. I'm going to throw a curveball. I have one more question. Sorry, guys. As you kind of work to scale this new office in Dublin,
Yeah.
what are some kind of infrastructure or just like team foundational elements that you're hoping to incorporate into the culture there as you
Yeah.
build it?
So, I mean, one of our core values is to iterate always. So I do want to bring that over. I want that to remain part of our core values in another office. Customer centric, obviously. I think when we make decisions, it's important that we make sure that we're making them in the best interest of the customer.
Sure.
I think, what's interesting, and this has probably been another challenge, kind of going back to that last question of like, what's been the hardest thing to scale, or what's been the biggest difference in the customer journey. And we've been talking a lot about this, and we talked a lot about it when we were over in Dublin, is bringing a product and a company to a new market, a market that's very diverse. So there are challenges in terms of just localizing. That's definitely a marketing challenge.
Sure.
We have to make sure that our messaging hits the right audience,
Yeah.
but in a way that's not offensive, or that makes sense to that region or that culture. But then also to just making sure that that we're respectful of that in terms, like, just in our company and our
Sure.
team culture as well.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I had like 6 questions and I've already asked like 12. So I'll turn it to you guys for questions. We're obviously courted, so we'll repeat any questions for the podcast. But what questions do you have? Don't all speak at once.
I was curious about what kind of challenges that you notice that some people may face with automation, because sometimes a lot of unexpected occurrences can happen.
Yeah.
And like you said, depending on your kind of business, it's their responsibility to be aware of what problems could possibly happen. What have you noticed?
Yeah, so I would say 2 things. So the first thing I would say, that challenges that I see customers make, or mistakes that I see customers make when they're automating, is they try to automate everything. So I think that's probably the number one. Like, you're trying to do too much when you need to insert a human at some point. And I think, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with automation, but typically it looks like, if you're familiar with like a lucid chart, like that's what the automation tends to look like, and different tools represented in different ways. But you can create an entire journey in one automation that might have multiple paths, but also multiple goals and conversion points as well. And I think that's probably the mistake, is they're trying to do everything in one. You end up over automating, so you end up losing your customer at certain points in your journey, and then you end up losing valuable data. I think the second piece is not being transparent about the fact that it's automated. I was listening to a podcast on the way down here, actually, and they were talking about that, about how chatbots, which is a piece of automation, not exactly the same thing, but it's part of it, and it's part of a larger discussion of having someone that's not a human talking to you, and how it's a really frustrating experience when you get that chatbot and it's disguised as a human, but it's not actually a human, and then you don't actually have any resources to tell you where to go to speak to a representative or to get that human connection. And a lot of times I think that's what people try to do, is there's a balance between automating, especially something like email, where you're trying to make it efficient. So you're sending out those emails and you want it to seem like a human, but I think having a point where you recognize, like, this is automation, I think your customers appreciate that more. The more you try to hide it, the less I think it becomes efficient over time. Yeah.
And the question was, I'm gonna you were on such a good flow, I didn't want to interrupt. The question was key data or top data challenges that people try to automate and it might become an issue or they run into roadblocks with. So sorry, I just want to catch up for the podcast. I saw a question over here.
Sir, are there any challenges that you guys face in terms of taking the information or
Hmm.
I mean, I come from a direct mail background.
Oh, sure.
So it's very much, well, you can't email them.
Right.
They're not gonna bother you.
Yeah.
I've always thought it was a loss, but
Yeah.
does that
How would you
kind of address that? Or?
how would you summarize that?
Yeah, let me see if I can, because I think there's a few different pieces there. So it's kind of there's a challenge in that customers may have customers that they can't necessarily email or do outreach through an automated process. Yeah, that's tricky. And just because, we have an email, we're part of our platform is email service provider, and being that means that you have to have explicit opt-in from the people that you're contacting, and that makes it difficult if you have like cold leads that you're trying to prospect and get sort of into those funnels. Do you mind expanding on your question just a little bit?
Through the process of the automation of emails and everything, even with opt-in,
Mm-hmm.
and again, I'm just going back to previous experience. They say they have email, and ultimately, you discover, or your client discovers through the automated email process that they are not actually emailable or contactable through the automated process. And in some of the experiences I've had, again, those people are considered, they're dead to us. They're
Sure.
not worth it. How do you guys address clients who discover that uncontactable segment of their base? I mean, do you shut them off into something, or do you just say, okay, now here's another sequence that you can start with outside?
Yeah, so to recap, so in the case where the contact might actually be unreachable, so I think in scenarios like that, I mean, typically what we would see is, maybe it's just bad data. Like the phone number or the email isn't accurate, which probably happens. Or, I think this is part of it too, as, there might be a manual component to gathering those leads or entering that data. And as humans, we're prone to error, especially if we're doing the same task over and over again. It's kind of like muscle memory. We input numbers or emails wrong. I honestly don't have a good answer for you, just because I think that at that point, when we have customers that we don't have good data for, just even for ActiveCampaign or for any customer that I would be working with, my advice to them would be go back to the drawing board and go back to scratch, to the beginning, and just start over, and figure out how you can connect with that customer through maybe a social channel, a different method, direct mail, cold calling, using whatever data that you have that is correct. But at a certain point, I think you're probably wasting more effort chasing them than you are investing into leads that are qualified or good. Does that answer your question? Okay.
And it's different than what I encountered where it was, okay, we can't email them, forget it.
Sure.
Even there was in some ways no worth to any effort past that point.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it's selfish and a little jealous. It's nice to see people or companies that don't just have a whole segment of people that just disappear.
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, it's hard when you lose customers like that. But again, I think it's just about figuring where you want to invest your resources, though, too. And I would look at overall time, how much you're spending on trying to recover them. If it's not something, we advise customers a lot to put them through re-engagement strategies. That's something you can actually automate, and you can give people the option to opt out. But again, your automation's only as good as your data. And so in that sense, so is your marketing or your prospecting. So hope that helps.
Your automation is only as good as your data. Somebody tweet that, please.
So I think you mentioned this in customer success. A metric you use is time to completion.
Yeah.
Which I think is really important, and that comes up in sales a lot too. And it helps you identify areas of wow, I'm spending
Yeah.
X amount of time manually emailing these people when we could have just put this in an email or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So from the marketing perspective, when let's say, I will just speak for FormStack, when we enter a Jira ticket, how would you recommend that we measure that time? Because I feel like marketing is, I don't know if anyone else experiences this,
Sure.
Kind of the poor outcome of that is I don't know how much value that produced.
Sure.
We can look at the leads that maybe we generated from that and see how many of those converted, but at the end of the day, if I spent an entire sprint doing that,
Yeah.
and it didn't convert very many leads, like how would you recommend qualifying that from a creative point of view?
That is a really good question. So the question for the podcast is how we talked about time to completion for tasks for success in sales. How do we put that same value on work that marketing is doing in a sprint as you're kind of working through Jira? Let me think on this one. Because so my go-to answer, so the thing that, and this is tricky because I think it depends on where marketing starts or where marketing stops, right? So if it ends after lead generation, or if that's the only metric that you're working off of, I think that that's a little bit hard to quantify that creative, because chances are that time spent is probably outweighs the time the value that you got back from the lead generation. Sometimes, I don't know if that's always the case. Another metric we look at is lifetime value. So we look at that from the time that the leads come in to the time that they're current customers and the time that they leave us. That gives us a better indication of how much we're spending per customer. So then we can actually use that in marketing to then kind of figure out where we're spending more time and where we should be spending less time. The only other advice I would have, just being a stakeholder in that kind of world where we have to work a lot with marketing, is trying to figure out a way to measure that time that you're spending on a task. And even if it is something that is creative, that you're probably having to pull in different teams or different stakeholders, or if it's a little bit more of an iterative process, it's not so black and white. I would say that it probably is really important to track that time, just because at some point it becomes time that you're taking away from other initiatives. And if you look at those initiatives or those tasks that you're completing on a daily basis and you don't have an overarching objective that rolls up into a company goal, then you're probably just wasting time. And I think that's probably just maybe working backwards, back up to what are you trying to actually achieve? Is it more leads? Is it increased revenue? Is it increased lifetime value? So think what that big goal is, and then you should be able to hopefully back into how that time actually equates to achieving that. That would be my advice. Sure.
Got time for a couple more questions, if anybody has one. Hi.
Can you speak a little bit to kind of how you chose the demo as the point at which you injected human scenario versus maybe trying to earlier in that cycle of deciding to
Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, why did we choose the demo as sort of the point to start human engagement versus automation? And honestly, it just had to do with volume. I think we have a lot of trial and we have a lot of lead volume that comes in, and while we may have a very large team to handle that, sometimes it's just not possible to do that on a manual basis every day. So it really just came down to that. That was a point that was meaningful, where we could not only have human interaction with the sales team, but we could also have interaction that also highlighted value in the platform. So for us, it was just sort of that next step. Yeah.
It's an awesome question. All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
I hope this makes sense. But do you track customers in every channel that they use to get to you? Do you track their journey through all those channels? For example, whether it's email or call on phone or entering your website or whatever. Do you track
Sure.
those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, do we track our customers or potential customers in every channel? I would say we try to. It's not the easiest thing, and we try to, but again, sometimes that's like data overload. So we have to pick out where those more meaningful touches are, and what leads to the better, like what actually leads to conversion. But yeah, I mean, we try to, yes. I think, that kind of goes back to, earlier we were talking about creating an auditing process, but then also, kind of mapping out what your customer journey is in its current state and what you want it to look like. And I think that's where you can kind of figure out where you need to spend time tracking your customers, is what you're doing right now actually get you to that ideal state. And a lot of times maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So, but we try. Yeah.
All right. Well, Courtney, you are right at home with this group. Anytime you want to make the drive down and, join us for a meetup, you're more than welcome, because I really appreciated all of this conversation today.
Thank you for having me. I do need recommendations for guacamole in Indiana. So
we have a couple
Chicago
people.
is lacking.
I think we have some decent guacamole options here. I'll connect you with some guacamole connoisseurs in the room after this.
Great.
Thank you so much, Courtney. Can we give a round of applause for her, please?
Thank you.